Hari Om.
All right, welcome back, everyone. So now that we have, I think, a pretty good idea of Vedic culture and Vedic history, let's take a look at the Vedas themselves, like dig into them now, and find out what they are, how they're organized, how they were used in Vedic rituals. In the Hindu tradition, there's a broad binary classification of texts. Work of literature is either Shruti or Smriti. Shruti or Smriti. Either it's heard or it's remembered. The only texts that are considered to be Shruti are the Vedas. Pretty easy to remember. This means that they're not traditionally thought to have human composers. They're not thought to have a history, a textual history. They're not thought to have a beginning or an end. The idea is that the Vedas have always just been exactly how they are. They're not man-made, they just exist. That's, of course, the belief within the Hindu tradition. The idea was that there was an original group of rishis, or seers, who had originally visualized the mantras of the Vedas for the first time. But the rishis didn't create the Vedas. Rather, the mantras have always just existed. The rishis just had a unique power to be able to put them into words, to articulate them. The rishis are the most revered human beings in the Vedic literature because of their natural gifts for being able to see the mantras. Then they're regarded as kind of superior to ordinary people, kind of closer to the gods in their power. All the other texts besides the Vedas are classified as smriti, or remembered texts. This means that they had human authors. They were composed at some definite moment in history, and they grew and changed over time. The term smriti is often used, by the way, to denote a specific type of text called the Dharma Shastras, which are manuals or codes of Brahminical moral law. You might see that word in that context sometimes. The other thing to note about the Vedic texts, and maybe this is where the word shruti comes from, actually, heard, is that there was a kind of a taboo against writing them down for a very long time, until roughly 500 AD. So the Vedas, until that time, were supposed to be transmitted orally from teachers to student within distinct schools that were called shakhas, or branches, which would then have their own special ways of teaching and learning the Vedic texts and how to do the rituals. The reason for this prohibition on writing and insistence on orality is kind of interesting to think about. On the surface, the idea was that words of a sacred Vedic mantra must never get contaminated or corrupted. They wouldn't, that wouldn't happen if a person very carefully memorizes the mantra and keeps it to themselves, right? But it could happen if you write it down, because you could have spelling mistakes, it could wear and tear on the manuscript, there's pollution, damage, and so on, right? A fly can land on it and all this gross stuff can happen to it. If it does get corrupted, a mantra could actually end up becoming harmful rather than helpful. It could bring ruin on the rituals and to society as a whole. There's also maybe some professional reasons why it stayed oral, since being able to recite the mantras entirely from memory made sure that the whole thing kind of remains as a trade secret among Brahmins. Keeping the mantras oral and taught only to the right students would make sure that these Brahmin secrets wouldn't get out, right? And so that only Brahmins would have kind of exclusive control over the Vedic ritual complex. So what were these trade secrets exactly, right? Let's take a look now at how the different Vedic texts are put together and what they are, right? To do this, I want to use an analogy if you're up for it. So imagine that one time you kind of throw a really awesome party and it went like really well. Like it was really, really fun, right? You might have this crazy idea like, I want to make sure that I can have exactly the same party over and over again with the same kind of music, the same food, the same people show up, the same chit chat happens, so that it's going to be fun every time. Like every year I throw the party, it'll be just as fun. 10 years from now, it'll be just as fun. 500 years from now, just as fun. Let's say you wanted to preserve that really fun party for time immemorial. This is kind of like what the Vedas are trying to do based on the technology that they had available at the time. You can think of them as kind of high fidelity oral tape recordings of the original sacrificial ritual events that took place a long, long time ago, maybe between the time period of 1500 to 1200 BC. These were originally kind of big gatherings, parties, fueled by lots of meat and soma, right, where sacred poets would come from different tribal communities in the Punjab. They would get together and have contests where they would try to outdo each other with mantras. It's kind of like a talent show, maybe, or a rap battle, really. These were originally kind of wild and free and experimental events. But after about 500 years of doing these rituals over and over and over again, they turned into kind of solemn, formalized affairs. And by the end of this period, they've turned into sort of tape recorded versions of the Vedas that we have. Here's how the Vedas work to record a snapshot of those ritual gatherings. There's 4 different Vedas, each of which captures one different element of the Vedic rituals. Each one of the Vedas had its own specialist priest who would be in charge of reciting the appropriate lines from his Veda during this yajna sacrifice. Kind of reminds me of a rock band in a way. There's like 4 guys doing 4 different things at the same time, all putting on a specific show together. The first and oldest Veda is called the Rig Veda, which literally means the knowledge of the verses. A ruch is a solemn hymn, a verse that praises the gods. You need the Rig Veda verses in every single ritual because these mantras offer praise to the gods who are going to be the guests of honor at your Vedic ritual party. Right? These were hymns. They were chanted in a deliberate, solemn way. They were designed to kind of reach towards the heavens through this Brahman that empowered them. The ruches, the hymns themselves, often talk about ancient myths about the gods and their struggles with the demons. We'll be digging into some of this mythology in our next unit. The priests of the Rig Veda is called the Hotar, which basically means the invoker or the summoner. His job was to get the gods' attention, and to kind of ensure basically that with his Rig Veda mantras, the whole event got supercharged basically with sacred power. The Rig Veda was the earliest of the texts to be compiled, and it was finalized around 1000 BC. The second Veda is called the Sama Veda, which means the knowledge of the songs, samans. The lyrics are taken from the Rig Veda, actually, and then set to some very ancient, kind of haunting melodies that we're going to talk about in our next clip. They're nothing like the music that you hear today, even in India, and operate on like a totally different scale and ideas of harmony and so on that are used by Western or Indian classical music. It's really quite an experience to hear Sama Veda. The Samaveda priests are called the Udgatars, singers basically, and they're somewhat more specialized than the other priests. Samaveda was only used in rituals that involved soma drink offerings. So I guess you can imagine if you're going to have drinks at your party, you got to have some good music, right? Good singing. The third Veda is also is probably the most important of all, actually, as far as the ritual is concerned, the Vedic ritual. This is the Yajur Veda, which is the knowledge of the ritual formulas, the Yajus. Unlike the other two, the mantras of the Yajur Veda are actually more like procedural instructions. It's basically the head Yajur Veda priest, who's called the Advaryu, who describes what he's doing as he's doing the various physical actions of the sacrifice. So he'll say things like, I'm pouring the ghee into the fire. I am now feeding Indra. I am drinking the soma. I am immortal, and so on. He's kind of the workhorse of the Vedic tradition, the priest who has to do all of the kind of grunt labor, the blue-collar work during the performance of a Vedic ritual. The Yajur Veda is divided traditionally into two kinds of texts. There's the white Yajur Veda and the black Yajur Veda. You don't need to get into the differences too much, but the basic difference between these two is that the white Yajur Veda consists of collections of ritual formulae, the mantras that you say during the ritual, and it's separate from the instructions on how to use those mantras. The instructions are called the brahmanas. And the Black Yajurveda, on the other hand, mixes them all together in kind of a running commentarial style of mantra verses followed right away by the explanation. It's kind of a technical difference. Finally, the fourth Veda is actually peripheral to the Vedic sacrifice. It's not used during an ordinary Vedic ritual party. It's called the Atharva Veda, or the knowledge of the Atharvanas, the magic formulas. These are incantations, spells, blessings, curses, cures. It's a huge kind of hodgepodge of different utterances that have a this-worldly efficacious value. You can use them to heal people, to live long, to ward off evil, to cure snake bites, to curse an enemy. You can even use them to seduce a lover. It's all kind of fascinating lore that's found in this Atharva Veda, and it's thought to be the kind of later addition to what were the original three Vedas.